But this is, as you know, Media Fundamentals for Unions. Gemma's a gun. We did this, I think we did this 3 years ago.
Probably was 3 years ago.
And my God, the things that have changed since then that we could use as examples is quite interesting. Even the change in the media, the way the media works and what goes on is quite interesting. So Media Fundamentals for Unions, or don't click.
Try the left button.
Yeah, that's left. I'll try right.
Okay, it
Might
need
need to, yeah.
to be open, touching the pad.
Yep, okay, or what happens when you catch the car? And Scott, who we ran a PowerPoint for from the back of the room many years ago at AT, so he can repay the favour, which is awesome. So what happens when you catch the car? Because unions, by and large, are pretty much always chasing the car. We want, there's a whole heap of positive stories you want to get in the media. They don't want to know, okay? They want to know when something bad happens. The rough rule of media management is every story you want to get in the paper will really, really struggle. Every single story you hope they don't find out about, they'll find out about all of them. So what do you do when you catch the car? So, thanks. Who am I? I think it's important you know whether or not I'm worth listening to. I've got a number of people in my life who tell you that I'm not. Hopefully a couple of people who pay me will say that I am. I'm a journo by trade, on papers in the UK, then over here in Australia, in WA, and community newspapers in particular, down at the Esperance Express. Then I went into sports journalism and then did 30 years in comms, or have done so far, which was terribly scary because I had to update that number of years. Tree Man made my life a misery. I worked in state and local government, and one of the local governments was the City of Gosnells. Guy climbed a tree on his front verge, and we had 100 days of media attention. We had media inquiries from Al Jazeera. We had Richard Branson getting involved. We were getting phone calls while I was away in Europe. My wife was getting quite fed up because phone kept ringing in Paris, and it was the project. Huge story. Three-person team, and one of the things I'm going to talk about is size of teams. So imagine dealing with that, and more importantly dealing with your day-to-day stuff, because when you're dealing with a media crisis, your day-to-day work carries on, and you've got to be doing that. So just mention that as we go through. State and local government, also politics. I did do state election campaigns and worked in Parliament for 6 months, working with the Greens at the time. I then come into working in the State School Teachers Union of Western Australia. I'll have been there 7 years in January. Very lucky, got very supportive bosses, and we've got a very, very good team, most of whom I inherited, and they're excellent. And that's why I've tried to, my perspective is I've got some ability to do various media management roles. Others will have one or two people in the entire union, and you're going to have to deal with that while you're doing your job. So, thanks, mate. It's the old one from marketing: planning and preparation prevent piss poor performance. The other P's you can use here are prepare, 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 prepare. Because the more you understand about the issue, and more importantly, what you want to say about the issue, that's how you can get the most out of any media opportunities that come along. We want to avoid this, and I apologise for trying. I don't think anyone was hurt during this actual accident. Yeah. But we want to avoid this, which is the term you use for a terrible interview is train crash interview. Now, when I did this presentation last time, we called it Doing a Brandis, which was a reference to George Brandis, who back in the day was the Attorney General, who went on to Sky News, and even on Sky News managed to stuff up an interview so badly that it became a legendary performance in the annals of terrible media appearances. Nowadays, I tend to call it Doing a Trump, because there was a guy who had this humongous support network of right-wing journos who would back rub him all the way, and still, pretty much every single time he actually did media himself, he managed to stuff it up. It was quite extraordinary. He got huge figures, but you'd think back to all of the COVID issues and various things. So he had that sort of ego that meant he didn't need to prepare. He could just free wheel, and it didn't work even for him. So to avoid that train crash, and this reflects on some of the discussion we've already had, my advice is never do an interview on the initial call. Now, I was sitting at the back of the room. There are going to be some circumstances, in this case horrendous ones, who are on site, there's an accident, and someone puts a microphone under you. you're in an invidious position and very stressful position, that's an exception. And if I could avoid it, I would, but in some cases you just can't. So, but if it's a normal, someone's calling you for a story, my advice is don't do the interview on that initial call. This is slightly different if you've had a media release out in the field and you're hoping people are going to pick it up. We hopefully will be prepared to talk about it. But if it's an unexpected call, I echo the advice. Do not do that. Either have a staff member as a point of contact for the media. You are much better off, and my president won't agree totally with me because she's been around a very long time and is a very, very good media performer. She actually hates doing it, but she's very good. And she will take a call from one or two journos and do the thing straight away. And sometimes I may find out the interview's appearing tomorrow in the paper. But in all seriousness, my general advice is don't have your own contact, whether it's an assistant, it's a comms team member, reception, and say you will call a journalist back, as has been mentioned previously, and do so if you say that. I'd add to this, I also go the email route, but I do it for questions. Now, a lot of journos don't like it, but I buy them when I say, no, I need your question in an email. I've got to get this to senior officers who are in and out of the building. I therefore want it not to be Chinese whispers about what the questions were. I want it to just be a simple, here's what we need to know about, and this is why we're asking. That gives you real control, and that's why the journos don't like it. I don't see journos as the enemy, but you've got to manage those situations internally in a clear way. Then prepare, and then either call them back or email again. As Phil has said, we do the same thing. The vast majority of times, if it's an unexpected issue that we have something to say about, we will prepare a release and we'll send it back to them in a written format. If the broadcast media then wants to come and interview someone, and they invariably will, if you're going to get a run on it, if it's TV journo, then we may set up a media opportunity later where the president or whoever is the designated spokesperson will have their say. But initially it's in writing. Yes? No, I'll come. But you'll get. No, but you will. It's a very good question. And yeah, look, I can deal with it next. I don't know if I've got a specific point on it, but no comment is. In a lot of media trainers will say you should always comment. I don't. There are times when you will not comment, but you will say why you are not commenting because there should be a good reason. Very rarely does just not calling someone back get you anywhere. They're not going to go, oh no, Dave Brown played me, they haven't rung me back. They're just going to be all over you. And you'll have also created a situation where they're going to start going, it might be a pretty nothing story, but they're going to start to wonder what you've got to hide. Why won't you comment? So they're going to dig a bit deeper. And the cover up, I mean, every media crisis situation I've seen that's gone horrendously wrong, it has been the cover up or the attempt to deflect that has caused more problem. Barry Urban, I was going to mention.
On that, sometimes in the fields, they'll have good reasons for not being able to have a comment. A classic example would be an occupational health and safety incident that's being investigated. And they have members involved and they don't want to compromise the investigation. But there can be other circumstances too. Sometimes they kick them up to Unions WA and we get served a shit sandwich sometimes if it's a contentious issue, but it can be, you're trying to help a journalist and if they need a quote, and to be honest with you, if they couldn't get a quote from a particular union, you might be in good faith negotiations with your university about an EBA and you might say, oh, I don't feel we can. Sometimes you can get another source like Unions WA or maybe even the ACTU that talks about Commonwealth funding to public universities and or the need to have pay rises equal cost of living, that sort of thing, to give a similar line to one that you would, but you've got reasons why you can't specifically.
Just because you were talking about the minister that said I'll get back to you with figures, and I wondered maybe it's being too clever by half to say I'll get back to you later. The case in mind I had was we were trying to manage a change management process and get a good outcome, and we were ambushed by the trots on campus who made this press release and said we'd talk about it. And I'm like, well, I don't really want to talk about it right now because I've almost got them across the line on one thing, and I don't want to keep them in the shins here. So
Yeah, and that's where I'm saying. What I'm saying is, if you've got a reason for not commenting, tell them what the reason is. That will quite often manage it.
That their source is not credible.
okay,
You know, they got fitted up by some person who lied to them to say that the union would be able to comment. And so, their bad faith with the journalists in that situation is something that's they're doing, not yours.
okay.
And what would so where we come to, is it good news? Your stylish media releases attracted attention, and what Gemma says about media releases is absolutely true. And you put a lot of effort into them, and they quite often don't get picked up. The trick that we use reasonably frequently, if we've got something we want to get into the media, we don't send a media release. What we do is we send an e-newsletter to our members, or we include it in our quarterly magazine. Because then the journos discovered this amazing story themselves. You're not pushing, and we know several journos who have got ins in to get our e-newsletter, either from other members, or they know people who are teachers, might be a relative or whatever. So we'll just sit that good news story in there, or even an explosive angle on something. We did our state of schools survey, so we gave that to the media, but we had it in Western Teacher. That was where it was going out first to our members, and they picked it up as Western Teacher started hitting the doorstops. So there is a way to sometimes feed your positive stuff in and get attraction to it. Journos sometimes just say, oh, this to me, there's an old adage when you're in journalism college, and they'll say, if people want it printed, it's probably not news. And if they don't want it printed, it almost certainly is news. So if you sort of don't go too open about it, we don't do it all the time, but it can sometimes work. So your strategy about responding to that interview, if you've done a media release, you should also be doing talking points if at all possible, so that whoever's going to go on the phone, nothing sounds weird if you ever do it, have a media release and read it out loud. And it doesn't sound right read out loud, because normally they're prepared for the print media, sent to all the media, but you're hoping community newspapers or someone else just going to cut and paste it and drop it in the paper, and often they will. So, but you then need to just do some talking points, 4 or 5 talking points, which you would then have as your basis for your good news story. So if someone approaches, you can say, oh yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. And that's when I'm saying, even on that point of call, I'd give yourself 5 minutes. You're going to ring them back in 15 minutes, go back, read your talking points. This is for a positive story, I emphasise. Then you call them, the journo, back and do it. Even a good news story, if you suddenly do it on the fly and you're picking your phone up and something else has been going on, you've had someone in the office moaning about something or some other issues happening, oh yeah, I'll do the interview, I know what I'm doing. Don't do that. Take 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever you need, reread your talking points and call them back. Quite often, radio in particular, if you've got a good little 10, 15 second grab, they'll run it and your phone call will last that long. I was literally in the office with one of our senior officers a couple of weeks ago. Triple M rang about a story we were doing a lot of media on. He read the first talking point, bang, done. Interview over, thanks very much, and it was on air 10 minutes later. So if you've prepped, that helps them, and that's your positive story, but you're still taking your time to read through your talking points and be smooth. Is it bad news? Now that's when your instinct kicks in to go, oh, look, I can't comment, phone down, turn the phone off, unplug the phone, whatever. The same principle applies. Say, okay, and the example of this at the back of the room, what? I didn't know that was happening. Don't say that out loud. As they say, don't say the quiet bit out loud. But do say, look, I'll look into that for you. I'm trying to get some more information on it, which gives the impression you actually know what they're talking about. And don't worry, I've had plenty of situations as the communications person, not here at the union, but someone rings up and then I suddenly find out, oh yeah, this has all been happening. Nobody bothered to tell the people at the media are going to call. I think with a fellow media person in the room might have had that experience every now and again. So you will get those situations. You see, I'm going to find out some more about that and I'll get back to you. And then we're back into, yes, give yourself time. Don't be pressured. The journos do call right on deadline. A number of times you go, oh, I'm going to press in an hour. If you don't speak to me now, you won't get outside of the story. The response to that from me is always an email saying, we're unable to comment at this time, but we would like to have our say. And then that's in. They can't say you refused to comment because you haven't, and it's in writing that you haven't, hence the email usage. So we'll just pop through and... so that's when you do need to go and find out what on earth is going on. Do you know what's happened? If you don't know what's happened, find out. Get details. In a lot of the time it will be bad situation, something's bad happened at a school. You know, a teacher's been assaulted. Do we know about it? Does our OSH rep know that this has happened? When did it happen? Are the injuries serious? I had a phone call at 6 o'clock the other night at home. Oh, we need an urgent comment. There's been this incident at such and such primary school. And I'm lucky because I'm not allowed to be a spokesperson and I don't want to be. Thanks very much. So I said, well, I've not personally heard of it yet. I'll do some checking, come back to you. If you don't hear from me in 15 minutes, there's nothing because it was after hours. Message the President, she came back, I don't know what they're talking about, and we don't know, we never heard another thing about the incident. So again, just take that time, be open, you're going to try and find out information for them, and then go back to them if you can't. We'll just go back if that's okay. Once you've got your details, and you've decided that yes, you need to do a media comment beyond look, it's going before the courts. Court cases, there are some very handy things. I hope this doesn't sound too cynical, but there's some very handy things that can happen when a big issue is happening. Number one, it involves criminal charges. Number two, it's going to some sort of commission of inquiry. Any court inquiry, the police are investigating because that's a time buyer for you in certain situations. We're not in the comments, the police are investigating. You may or may have not noticed the Morrison government doing this repeatedly over some very, very serious issues at the national level. And they've now managed to put off commenting or releasing any reports for nearly a year on certain issues now, simply by saying it's before the courts. It's cynical, but it can also be used in your context to help you. But if you are going to make a comment, and it might be about a broad safety issue, there's been reports of safety concerns at the Forestfield tunnel, rail tunnel, yeah? What are your key messages on those? Exactly, and I try not to be too, some media trainers will tell you it must be 3, some will tell you you should have 5 or 6. I tend to say 3 to 5 and it's what you're comfortable with, okay? Because those are the points you're going to repeat again and again in your interview and use as the core to any answers. People can feel quite uncomfortable, they sound like a politician if they avoid the question completely. That's not what I'm suggesting. What I'm suggesting is are you going to take strike action over this? And your 3 points may well be, we're going to keep all our options open about what action we may take. We want immediate action on improving safety measures, and this is what needs to happen. So you might have 3, you might have 5, and however many you feel comfortable with, but write them down. Sit in a room, preferably with someone else. If you're a one-person band, fair enough. You might have to just rely on your own judgment. But there's normally someone you can bounce those things off in the office. Do they make sense? Are they accurate? If you're using figures, have you checked the figures? Because you don't want to get caught out with the minister says there's 400 people being laid off and you said there's 1,000. Make sure the numbers are accurate. So write them down, go through them, do the little fact check, revise them, write them down again. Because what you're doing, and this is not your media advisor, this is you, or if you have one, or your comms person, this is you, because you're the one who's going to go and then talk on radio or be on TV, for example. In a media release, written release, very easy. But have those messages done. So speak those messages when it is radio or TV, say them out loud. I've had people I've been doing media with who could not say specific words, one of them being specific. They just could not do it. You'll have heard the chihuahua wow wow thing from David Honey. Now he was more stupid than most because he wrote something in his speech that he couldn't say. Think about that for a minute. You've written down a word. When you get up saying, you actually don't, it's not that you have no idea how to pronounce it. So what a weird thing. It's not stage fright. It's you've written down a word you've never said out loud to yourself. Very strange thing. But you might have words that you struggle with. Just be careful. Well, I'm just trying to think of one we had the other day, but it'll come back to me in a moment. Exacerbate was the word that should have been used, and we constantly kept getting it said wrong. So you take that word out, because once it's in your head and you've started mispronouncing something, it's amazing how you'll suddenly revert back to that pronunciation when the lights go on or the camera's running. So if you're struggling with a word, scrub it, come up with a replacement. Simple language, please, simple language. Haven't just used the word exacerbate, but you know what I mean. And we did end up reverting back to it'll make it worse.
If you come across a word that you don't know how to pronounce, and you do kind of need to say it, go to Google
Yep.
Translate, translate it into Chinese, convert it around the other way, and then play the button, the little sound button that will show you, and it'll play in English how that word is pronounced. Probably without an Australian accent, but you can get around it without necessarily embarrassing yourself.
I'm just thinking about Google Maps and it tells me to go to Aberdare Street.
Yeah, I tell you one that does bring to mind is foreign name pronunciations. You'll quite often have members who you don't know their name and you're talking about them. If they've just been in an incident or something, you don't want to get it wrong. That is a definite. It's one a bit of a sideline every now and again commentating on football matches. So I do Google, I go and you can there's a name pronunciation software, type in the name and it'll give you the pronunciation. Again, sit down, write it out phonetically. When I'm writing, well, I don't write speeches anymore really, but when I was writing speeches, I would often spell out names and certain words phonetically, because when you're reading it off the page, that's a lot easier to do. If it works for you, do it. And that's why I'm saying that detail of writing these messages down. Some of you will be thinking in your head right now, oh yeah, such and such an issue. I know that's going to come up. And you can actually have those pretty well ready to go. There are certain scenarios you're probably going to encounter in your various roles, and you're thinking, okay, I can have some phrases pretty well ready to go. So be concise, use plain English, consider what emotional response you are seeking. I've often had to people stop smiling. We're talking about people losing their jobs, because you naturally want to be friendly, don't you? The reporter's really nice, and you're talking to the reporter. The camera's here, but see, Phil's over here, and I'm talking to Phil. I don't want to be scowling at him, but then I'm suddenly smiling as I'm talking about job losses when the actual broadcast goes out. So just be wary of how you are
There's a point where
looking.
that often happens.
Yeah.
Which is that they'll do a talk to camera to get the interview. And then they'll say, we'll just do what they call
cutaways.
or B-roll, which is really just vision. They'll have probably the journalist say something over the top of. And there you, if you're the talent or one of the officials, will be in a conversation or walking down a hallway. And that's the point where you've got to know what your emotional tone is. And if the emotional tone, it might be celebratory, members have just won a significant pay rise, in which case a smile's fine. But what happens is as soon as the camera's off for you, you're elated. Because the interview.
Oh, thank God, I didn't say exacerbate wrong.
It worked out right, and you'll be smiling straight away. And of course, if it's a serious story, they won't be wanting that in the B-roll, so you've just got to, cut the cloth to suit.
Yeah, and have your comms person, if you have one in the room, who'll scowl at you when you start doing that. Oops, sorry, thank you. If you're going to go on TV or radio, if you have a comms person, if you're a small union and something massive happens, you might look at options for getting in a consultant. It will be costly, but it will probably save you time and money in the long run if it's a really big issue. So they could be doing this for you. But if not, if you're handling it all yourself,
Or you'd be ringing me.
or Phil, sorry, yes,
Or I would be putting
or
you in
me.
touch with Bob
Yeah.
or Jim or somebody that's available. Basically, any of the smaller affiliates without a full-time sort of comms media person, we can get you access.
Yeah, and my General Secretary, Mary Franklin, is absolutely enthusiastic and supportive of us helping other unions out. So we're always happy to help wherever we can. And Phil, we rely on Phil for things as well. So it is that, collective effort. So the questions are, if you're doing it, who will be doing it? I do this in the email that I'm sending with my initial statement, particularly to radio or TV. They'll come back and say, oh, look, or they'll text you nowadays, mostly SMS. I would love to do an interview. Okay, sort out a time, allow for some prep time. They've called you at 10. You say, we'll do it at midday. You've got, you're free half an hour before, so you can just go through those questions and comments again, ideally. Not everything's ideal. In that same time, when you're setting the time, who'll be doing the interview. That, for me, in a practical sense, helps me arrange them to be able to get access to the building or parking. If they're lugging a camera and I go to the trouble to put them in a bay near the lift, camos love us because they know we'll put a backdrop up for them. We know we'll allow for light. We know we'll not ask their name as well as the journos. And we can help them out just a little bit. So who's doing the interview? Who's coming? When will the interview be? Radio, 9 times out of 10, they'll tell you they want you at 5 to 9 or 5 to 10 or 5 to 11, and you'll be sitting on hold till about 10 past the hour. That's just the way it is. They tend to get you up because they want their job as a producer behind a desk in a radio station is to have you on the line. Now, they know they've got the news and a couple of ads to run, and then Fred's going to do a little intro to the story, or he's going to reflect back unscripted on something they did before. So just allow for that. Don't expect to be going straight to air. And sometimes it's much better not to be. There will be a little bit of a wait. Note down, if you're doing a radio interview in particular, so you're being called up on the phone, write down the interviewer's name. All right, because Gary Adshead and Liam Bartlett, and I know a few of them, and none of them are particularly nasty people, but they quite like to be called the right name. So it's worth having their name noted down. So yeah, thanks Gary. They appreciate that. You've made an effort. Where will the interview be? Will it be on the phone in your office? If the TV are coming, have you got an indoor area? We're down in West Street in West Perth. Nightmare traffic. Up and down, double glazed windows. So we put them in our big conference area whenever we can. We've got a backup room in our kitchen. Lounge area. And we've got a media backdrop that we have that we can shift around with reasonable ease. And if you need a backdrop, if you've got a couple of pull-up banners, if you stagger them just slightly, you don't have to go and spend a fortune, but it's quite good to have that identity in the background. Shirts are good. Even when it's a bad news story, you'll stand up for your members and you're out there fronting for them, so that's not a bad idea. So if you're in control, you can say, come to our place, we'll do it at 12. How many people are coming? I'll come to that in a moment. How long will the interview take? You want me for 5 minutes, 10 minutes? And what are the subjects to be covered? Thank you. Then there's some more. So ask some more. Will any other people be interviewed on the topic? Don't get ambushed. Okay, oh yeah, we want to talk to you about the issue with the firefighting foam. Oh great, this is our chance. We've been after this. And then there's a resident on who wants the fire station moved. All your members have got a shift. So just, you're knowing then who is there someone else on? Because you can quite often suss out if there's going to be some sort of conflict or an ambush. What's the format of the program or article? You might well know the West does its big long podcasts now, of course. That's become a very new thing for the West. And they're doing a lot of them. I think that was mentioned earlier. Is it radio or TV? What you will find now is a lot of the TV people who come along, I've got a camo and a journalist. They're filming for a 15-second grab on the news, but they're also doing the story for online. So they're going to take a couple of photos of you on the phone, and it's going to go up online probably before it goes on TV. Same with the West. In the old days, they'll come and just do a print story. They'll now often have an online story with vision and text as well. So what format is it going to be? Live, taped, edited? Those sorts of fairly obvious questions. Audience present is probably very unusual, but it might be for talkback, for example. So radio audience, will there be talkback questions? My rough guide, unless you're really, really good or really, really confident, which can sometimes be a bad thing, but if you're really, really good, talkback's okay. If you're not too experienced, be careful about saying, yeah, and I'll do talkback, I'll take questions, because that's where it goes completely off script. And you'll be surprised how many interviews that have gone along very swimmingly suddenly hit some shoals once the audience start asking questions and people are stumbling for the answers, the old pint of milk trap, what's the price of a pint of milk and all that. But you might get a very disgruntled former member on, and suddenly the whole interview's gone a bit pear-shaped. So my general advice, unless you're certain of what it's going to be, don't take talkback questions. Some hosts will ask you when you're on air, and you're probably a bit stuck then, but just try and go back to your talking points and answer in that way. Thank you. Now, some of this sounded very negative, right? as Phil said, and I've heard listening around the table, there are obviously some people here who have encountered very negative journos who are pushing an agenda, all right? I have encountered very, very few of those in 30 years. Very few, a tiny minority. It's probably growing a little bit now because big media companies have more of an agenda. But by and large, most journos are there to do their job honestly and properly. And if they're doing that, you've actually can see pretty much every interview as an opportunity. It might seem like a really negative issue, but can you get your positive story on it? And that's where you're sitting down and honing your replies. So, for example, during the COVID, what we were going back to was all of the time our positive story was schools are still open by and large in WA. We want to keep them open, but we want our members respected in terms of the workload they're going to have to cope with. So we always had a positive go back to. So there was always an opportunity. You can also, if you got the chance, you can turn a negative story about one union member is complaining into, well, actually we've got 5, 10, 15,000 members. They're all very happy. Our membership's actually gone up in the last 2 years. So there's normally an opportunity, even in a negative issue, to try and make something positive. There's different types of television interviews. So the one at the top is an all-in, and that's what you see in here. This is post-budget lock-in from a few years back now. Pat Byrne, our president, is there answering questions about the budget. That's what we call an all-in. You've got a massive issue. Everybody wants to know what's going on. You do not want to be doing the same thing, a different interview every 15 minutes or half an hour, not least because you want to keep your messages consistent. So that's an all-in. There won't be many of them, hopefully, because it tends to be a really big issue. The downside is you've got to be just calm because you'll be getting peppered. Jeff Parry will be there asking the same questions. If you don't watch them, the masterclass in the last, 18 months now has been Mark McGowan doing the COVID presses. You can't hear all of the questions, you sometimes can, but you'll have noticed that you can hear 2 or 3 journos. Normally, Jeff Parry, Gary Adshead, and Peter Law from the West now, a lot of the questions, and a couple of the Channel 7 journos. But you will get people bombarding you with questions from different angles. Sometimes that'll be helpful because they get you out of a sticky spot. Others, they might really be sort of ganging up to hammer people. So that's an all-in. I would hope you're not doing too many of them. And if you are, seek professional guidance from Phil or myself or someone else if that's something you're not used to. Media conferences, that tends to be, you're saying to the media, we're going to hold a conference. You'd love them all to turn up and make it an all-in. Nowadays, you'll probably get one camera crew and one interviewer from one station who'll do what they call pool vision. So instead of everybody turning up to everything, the channels, I think it's 10 and ABC, or ABC and said, they sort of work together and say, well, we'll go here, you go there, we'll swap the vision, do your own edits, any questions you want to ask. So you don't get massive gatherings too often nowadays. But normally a media conference is something you're called, again, to deal with an issue of a reasonable level. Edited one-on-ones, GWM, we were doing stuff on remote teaching in our current negotiations around the new general agreement. GWM are very interested in that. We also had the issue of teachers having to be put up in caravan parks a couple of weeks ago. They came in specifically today, asked. It's not something the Metro are particularly interested in. The GWM come in and it's a one-on-one TV. There's a whole people who are better at it and far more qualified than me to teach you all through that. There's some basics about cameraman's there, I'm talking to Phil, the cameraman's shooting me there, I'm not looking into the barrel like that because you look like a murderer. Okay? I'll dead set tell you, if you ever look straight down the barrel in an interview, no matter how lovely you are, you will look like an axe murderer. Okay, so you're talking, having a normal conversation. The other tip is never forget that you are not talking to the journo, right? In actual sense. Your message is going out to their viewers. So you're not there to impress them or win an argument with them or get distracted into scoring points. You're there to talk sensibly about the future of education in Western Australia and why we need proper funding, because you're going over them to the people. Try not to get annoyed with the journo or distracted by that. That's why we're talking about being prepared with your messages, because you are talking to the public behind them. They're just your conduit to that bigger audience. Remote interviews. When we first did this, people look, what? That's a Zoom interview, and they're very, very common now, particularly if you end up dealing with any of the interstate media for anything, or even international media. So you'll Zoom on and Zoom off. New sets of rules, just things to remember. Are the doors locked? Can you keep the kids out? Can you have a button that you can press to get your partner to send the kids in if things are going badly?
I've had, this is related to also cutbacks to newsrooms.
Yep.
News services, just get a bit of video of that for us on your phone and Dropbox that to us. Don't go where with that. Like the Zoom, they're tolerating lower quality footage than they would have before the pandemic. But I've had them just say, get it off your phone as well. And it's really just, in the case of say Channel 10, which has got the lowest TV news viewership in the state, they've got an hour to fill. So when they have a quiet news day, you know, the cat up a tree story can kind of get a bit of a run, really.
Please don't mention trees, feel like it.
Oh, sorry, it's traumatic.
But no, so that is, you're getting more and more of that. We're in the middle of our GA. We're getting a lot of people, members. We don't do too much with members because, you know, the department, if they're not very careful what they say, they can find themselves in trouble with the department. So what we did is we've done some very carefully scripted things that can't be construed as critical of the department or the government, but they're about our general agreement. So I'm especially glad that the State School Teachers Union is looking to extend the range of air conditioning allowances, for example, both the span in terms of time, because summer's getting, the hot periods are getting longer, and also locations are getting hotter that didn't have an air conditioning allowance before. So we're getting people to shoot them on their own phone, or a friend shoots them on the phone. The resolution is now so high that it's broadcast quality. Donkeys years ago, when I first studied, you had to go and get someone to shoot with a camera and get a transparency, a slide to get it in a newspaper. And the phones are about 10.5 megapixel. The iPhones now have 12. So you've got professional, you won't get, I know Phil's going to jump on me in a moment, but you will not get professional quality photos. It's a very different thing. But you'll get a quality of photo that newspapers can use. So if you've got someone you trust out on a site and you think, yeah, they're sensible, get them to take a shot. They don't send it to the journo or the little movie, they send it to you, and then you can trim it and have a look at it and make sure it's all okay. Much more usable, much more accessible than even 5 years ago that you could do that. Thanks, sorry.
What I was going to add on that point, which is a great one, is that we're doing a video. It might be a little bit shaky and so forth, but all lines of work are talking about a real experience. So basically, and I know Ash is going to be talking about this in her stuff, but that's integrity. And if it's got integrity, it doesn't have to be schmick. In fact, if it's too schmick, it detracts from the authenticity. And so it can fit.
And you have a heap of people who are out there at the moment spending a fortune to try and create what looks like a home shot video because they know it works better, but they're out and spending a fortune on it. Depends on the circumstance, definitely. I'm sorry, I might be going to Ash's presentation. I hope I'm not, so I'll move away from that. That was me at Halloween. Television can be scary, okay? So that's it. For those of you not familiar, nobody's got a clown phobia. I should have just warned on that. So it's just. So keep calm and be prepared. That's very similar to what I was saying before. I know it's a lot about preparation. You may think I've got a small theme and a slight obsession with preparation, and that's because I have. But yeah, just be calm and be prepared. Our most recent senior vice president, he won't mind me saying this, was terrified when we first started talking about him doing media. He did some professional media training with a consultant that we have. That's limited. You can only do so much. There's only so much time in a week. And then we took him aside in our comms meetings for about 4 weeks and absolutely slaughtered him. We videoed him and we pulled it to bits. No, it was quite nice. He's very good. He's got that confidence is built and he's calm about it. So if you're calm and you're prepared, you'll be okay. They're not really out to do you. As long as your info's good, they're actually just looking to get this story done. Thank you. Sorry. So the quick tips, remember your key messages. Don't overload people. Jargon is right out. Nobody knows what it means except you. 3 to 5 is enough, and you won't get all of those in. If there's an inaccuracy, if someone puts a question to you and says, oh, look, we've seen that 100 members have recently resigned over this issue, and it's not true, say, no, hold on, that's not true. This is the question. Don't even say the question, just say that simply isn't true. I'm going to give you some evidence. You can even stop the interview if you need to. Don't accept an inaccuracy in a question. Just say that isn't true. I'm not talking about in the ding-dong of your response, but actually, well, actually isn't true. So let's just hold on for a moment while we get that fact assessed. Explain yes or no answers. So don't just do yes or no, because they won't be back. And you might not want them to come back, but you need to try and use your positive messages rather than a yes or a no in an answer. That will make more sense when you come across some of the scenarios probably later on. There are no dumb questions, so treat all questions seriously. That sounds a bit weird, but I might ask a question, you're thinking, these people know nothing about it, and you might want to belittle them. You're not talking to Phil, you're talking to the audience beyond them. So if you're looking at a journo and you're being smart or sarky, you're not being smart or sarky to them, you're being sarky to that audience behind that they're broadcasting to. Now my boss has taught me this, my current boss, and she's an absolute gun at it. She has no hesitation whatsoever. She might be through a really good complex answer and she'll make a stumble and she'll say, oh sorry, I'm going to stop and say that again. The journos will respect that without, in my experience thus far, touch wood, exception. They'll respect that and start again and she'll repeat the answer. So don't be afraid to do that. You're in charge of the interview. It's your interview. You're helping them. I think that's... So never speak off the record. If you do not have, I'm going to go as far as say, if you do not have a comms team, my advice is don't, because that's something they should do for you. I do background and I'll do the odd off the record, this is what's really happening, because if it ever gets misused, that's on me. And I know my boss will not have a go at me for it, but you should not, though the boss is making the action, if you should not be briefing off the record, because they might get caught out. So if you get what I'm saying, I'm a comms person. If they come back and say, oh, well, you've told us, and it's, yeah, but that was an off-the-record briefing. He's not a spokesperson for the union, I am. We've got to cut out then, yeah? So my advice is, unless you know the journo really, really well, and I'd be 99.9% confident in them, I would still think twice about speaking off the record, to be honest. If there's an ability for someone else to do a briefing, you ring them and say, look, I'm going to tell you this, it's on a completely off the record basis, but I want to give you some info about something that's going on. Take the gamble, but my advice is don't. It can backfire horrendously. Unless you're Scott Morrison's office, in which case do it all the time because everybody wants to stay on the drip and we'll just print whatever you tell them without question. Never assume the camera is off. Every camera is filming, every mic is live, without exception. The friend, again, unlikely to happen, but it's a bit more likely than the off-the-record confidence being kept by someone you know. They do this, what they'll do is say, the interview's over, thanks very much, we're just going to get some cutaways. The cameraman will hoist the camera up on his shoulder and walk around to a different part of the room, just getting a different angle. Now, in the meantime, the journo is doing, well, you must see, I mean, you've handled that interview very well. Really, though, you must have been absolutely, oh, yeah, the guy's a dickhead. Thanks very much. And I've seen it happen, not in exactly those terms. You've actually, if you ever saw the one about Peter Dutton at the Climate Change Conference, where they had the boom mics, and he's making the sort of comments you'd expect Peter Dutton to make about climate change, mic's on. I've had people on, I was working with George Grilicic once at a football match, and he started giving it some about the Turf Club of WA, and I hit his dump button and cut him off because he'd forgotten and he'd been in broadcasting for donkey's years. So that microphone is always on in your mind and the camera's always live. Don't do anything that you don't want to go to air while you're near a camera or a microphone. I know it sounds like paranoid, but it isn't, because it's just you go, oh. I've seen the physical reaction of people. 10 people pointing cameras at him and they go like that. Oh, thank God for that. Oh God, that guy's a dickhead. And it's a relaxation thing. So just be careful with that. Telling the truth can help get it back, because people, that authenticity is a phrase you'll hear all the time nowadays. You know what authenticity is? It's telling the truth. It's being real. And my advice is do where you possibly can. If you've stuffed up, have you ever been to a meeting where the meeting's called and it's all because something's gone wrong? I had a couple of those in local government, and one of them I just said, it's my fault. And the meeting went silent. I said, that's my fault. I made that mistake. That was the end of the meeting. We didn't have 10 people come trying to avoid responsibility. I think sometimes if you take responsibility and say, yeah, we made a mistake here, we got the wrong person into the job, we didn't do our checks properly, lawyers will be telling you to obfuscate because you might get legal liability. But if you say, we've done this wrong and we're going this to fix it, you normally move on from a story in a day. I was going to mention the guy in the hills, I think Barry Urban, right? Now, he ended up as elected. He lied on his CV. He'd won a medal he wasn't entitled to. Every step of the way, he lied. When it was being followed up by a bloke called Gary Head, said, all right, no, I'll declare my interest. I know Gary, I know his dad is a football coach, and I played football with Gary. Hell of a reputation as a journo, sometimes good and sometimes bad, but I'll tell you what, he's an absolute, he won't let go of a story once he's got that scent in his nostrils, and that was just handy because the guy kept lying. If he'd have come out and said, oh God, I've made some terrible errors, you're absolutely right, I thought I was entitled to this medal. You remember it came out about 6 weeks later, it came out with a follow-up. If he'd have come out with that day, he might not have survived politically, but he might not be, is he in prison or on bail or on remand? Anyway, it would have been done with a lot quicker than it was dragged out. You will not get away with it. You're far better off getting out from, we made a blue, we're doing this to fix it and move on. In my opinion, it can vary from situation to situation. Never come across one where covering up has worked. Never once. So we can build a big mythology up about how people interact with the media. And there are some things that make it a lot easier, steps you take to make it a better thing to do. Bottom line is, in your own life, how do things get fixed? How do you move forward from bad things? You recognise they've happened. You say, look, if it was our fault, sorry, or my fault, sorry we did that, we're going to do something differently now. This isn't that different. In a crisis comm situation, if you've done the wrong thing, you're best off working out why it happened, how can you fix it, and then going out with a clear plan that you can share with others. If you have not done the wrong thing, defend yourself to the hilt. No problem at all. But if you've done the wrong thing, sometimes this word spin is used a lot now. It wasn't used when I first started. You're going to spin our way out of it. And this literally comes from, we're going to try and turn this around and make out the opposite happen. That's what it's developed into, and you see it in politics. I actually think people are a bit of a tipping point, where they're going now, you know what, I'm all right, I'll take that I've made a mistake. I'm going to come in, Mark McGowan again, he said I'm going to do this, this, this and this. Some of the things we don't like as unions. I like the public sector salary cap, for example. But what you can't fault him on, and I've been on polling booths recently and stuff, but people love him for his straightforward honesty. You might not agree, but he does what he says he's going to do, and I think there's a bit of a shift in that.